Signals 20, the content series for marketing rock stars.
And today's session is the colliding worlds of privacy and personalization. And I am thrilled to have Fatemeh Khatibloo, Principal Analyst at Forrester, who is an absolute expert in this particular space, an analyst that I have covered and followed for quite a long time now. She invented zero-party data, coined that phrase, and has been leading the charge in marketers' use of ethical data. So welcome, Fatemeh.
It is always a pleasure to speak with you, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Well, we have got an interesting topic to talk about today, one that I know is near and dear to both of our hearts, and there's some very interesting news this week. But before we get into that, first question. There's a clear emphasis on privacy and transparency in today's society. And we've seen many changes in privacy regulations that have happened in the last 18 months or so. Could you give us a quick overview of some of the big changes that are impacting marketers for those that want a quick education?
Yeah, sure. So I have sort of been talking about this moment in time as the era of data deprecation from a marketing and advertising perspective. Frankly, what we're seeing is that there are three forces kind of coming together to really impact and reduce the amount of data that marketers and advertisers will have available to them. The first is consumer behavior and consumer attitude. So we are seeing consumers actually start to act on the privacy concerns that they have always said that they have. So they are using privacy-preserving tools. They're increasingly using things like incognito mode and private browsing to go online and search for things when they don't want to get retargeted. 77% of consumers in the US have used one privacy-preserving tool online. So that's a really, really huge number. The other thing that we talk about in this data deprecation world is regulation. And whether you're talking GDPR or the California Consumer Privacy Act and its, stronger stepchild, the CPRA, the California Privacy Rights Enforcement Act, or just recently we saw the strongest biometrics Privacy Act get passed just in the past couple of weeks. So regulations are really kind of starting to constrict and constrain the amount of data that's collected about consumers and what private companies can do with that data. And then the last thing is the sort of technology wars, whether it's the big social media platforms beginning to lock down their walled gardens even more than they have been, or you're talking about the browsers who've decided to take their rightful place as user agents. This stuff is really all coming together and converging in a very interesting way to reduce the amount of data that's going to be available about consumers that is going to be usable by marketers and advertisers under these regulations and this new world of privacy.
Yeah, and we've talked quite a bit on Cheetah digital channels about the browsers deprecating support for third-party cookies. I think there's just over a year left of Google support before they deprecate it. So we've talked a lot about that, but iOS 14 and Apple's IDFA has a big impact on marketers. So could you give the folks a little bit of information about that and what it means?
Yeah, sure. So this is really interesting because Apple, more than any other technology company, has both hinged its branding on privacy and actually taken steps to kind of expose data uses, if you will, in the app-based world and in the browsers. So with IDFA, and IDFA is the Identity for advertising acronym, they have announced that IDFA is actually going to be an opt-in consent-based mechanism. What that means is when a user installs your app, goes to use your app, they're going to get a little pop-up in the same way that they do now for location that's going to ask whether or not they are okay with your app using their data for advertising and for tracking. Now, this sort of turns everything on its ear because up until now, the US in advertising and marketing has not had an opt-in consent-based mechanism, right? We have been, look, you can opt out of all kinds of stuff if you know what the right thing is to click on, but you have to, opt in for this and accept the use of your data, allow the use of your data. So that's a really big thing. And also noteworthy is that Apple has walked it back a little bit. So their intention was that it would roll out with iOS 14, which I think comes out. I can't remember. But they have walked it back a little bit for a couple of reasons. The sort of public reason is that Facebook was very vocal about the issues that it was going to create for the Facebook app, and Apple said, look, we're going to give developers a little bit more time to get their arms around this. Great. The other issue at play, though, is that Apple is now in the middle of a giant potential antitrust monopoly lawsuit. Mm-hmm. And they may be very cautious about the idea that they're going to further entrench and further lock down their ecosystem right now. So they may just be, we're just going to be a little bit more careful about this and give developers a chance to react.
Yeah, that's interesting. The kind of tech wars side of this whole debate is clearly a massive impact on marketers and the options they have moving forward. But coming back to regulations for a moment, obviously there's been quite a lot of regulations have been passed over the last couple of years in multiple markets around the world. How do you actually see privacy regulations evolving over the next few years?
Well, the really big thing is we have to start enforcing them.
Right.
And that's the thing that we've sort of missed so far. I don't think we're going to see a federal privacy law anytime soon. I think the last time you and I spoke was summer or spring of last year.
Yes, that's right.
in a similar kind of a forum, right?
Yeah.
And I said it then, and I still think it's going to be a few years. We're not going to see it. I don't think there's the political will or that people are willing to spend their political capital on a federal privacy law. But CCPA is certainly, taking steps to reduce the amount of cookies that are firing on websites and kind of raising exposure and visibility about some of these issues. And then on top of that, we've got this really interesting thing happening, which is, again, the CPRA. Now, CPRA, just for a little quick history lesson, has been brought to the ballot by the same architects as the original CCPA. CCPA initially was intended to be a ballot initiative, and they had all of the signatures that they needed to put it on the ballot in 2018 or 19. And that was great, right? But the legislators and the technology companies realized, oh, this is a problem for us. So they went to the legislature and they said, hey, can we turn this into a legislative piece of policy as opposed to having it be a ballot initiative? Because in California, if something is a ballot initiative, it can only be changed by ballot initiative. So it was really, really potentially damaging. Okay, so fast forward a few years, CCPA has passed. It's now being enforced as of July 1st of this year. And the framers, the original folks who put CCPA on the ballot, have decided it's not going far enough. There's no private right of action for privacy breaches. There's no enforcement body under CCPA. They've sort of left it to the Attorney General. And they decide to put this thing back on the ballot again. And not only do they address some of those challenges and some of those gaps that they think exist as a result of the original legislative process, but they've added a whole bunch of stuff. They've clarified some things, which is great for advertisers and marketers. But they've added things like categorization of data that you're no longer allowed to use for certain purposes. They have specifically called out behavioral advertising as a sale of personal information. CPRA right now has a favorability rating of about 73% in California. And that's after you show people the opposition ads. So it's likely to pass. And it really raises the stakes for advertisers and marketers. At the same time, we're also seeing other states reinvigorate their privacy legislation. So we've seen Washington, which was unable to pass a privacy law for 2 legislative sessions, bring a third one around this year. And I'll tell you, it's looking better than the first one and the second one did. It's looking much more likely to have the support in the Washington legislature. We've got 2 biometric privacy laws that have passed in the U.S., and Washington also just passed. Oregon just passed one, and it covers private businesses, which is different to most of the biometrics laws. So think about things like when we do facial recognition for emotion tracking, or when you're doing voice imprints, when somebody calls a call center and you do a voice print, whether it's for fraud or for figuring out if they're really angry and you need to route them to a tier 1 rep. All of those things are biometric data, and we're going to have to treat them very differently. And the last thing that I'll just mention, because I know everybody is as excited about regulations as I am, is international. And the really big thing here is that Europe is effectively using GDPR as a trade issue. So as their trade agreements are coming up for renewal and renegotiation, they're requiring countries to have a privacy and data protection law on their books that is adequate to GDPR. So it's a huge different way of thinking about privacy as a legislative issue. It's now thinking about privacy as a trade issue.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So if you kind of think about it, we've got this background of a ratcheting up of political / legislative pressure around privacy. And this week, we've just had some big news that looks like Oracle has won the bidding for the US operations of TikTok, of ByteDance's TikToks. That has to be seen, that transaction has to be seen in the context of these privacy changes, doesn't it? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. My colleagues have actually written a really interesting blog post from the perspective of security and compliance and risk. And that's one piece of this, which is huge, right? There's national security issues. There's what is Oracle, as a technology company going to be able to do about this or with this? My perspective is a little bit different. So yes, I think of it from the privacy perspective, which is to say all of this user data is now going to be in the hands. I should caveat to say that the DOJ just still needs to approve this deal. So we should all be very careful about kind of, counting our chicks before they hatch and all that. But if it is approved and if it finally goes through, then you've got one of the biggest ad tech companies in the world now sitting on what is effectively a massive, massive identity graph and first-party data asset. And the reason that I think that's interesting is they being Oracle, just jettisoned their sort of third-party DMP data assets, right? So they're seeing the writing on the wall that third-party data is really dangerous. They're seeing the writing on the wall that walled gardens are going to become more entrenched and stronger. This is their chance to get in on that. And so I think, as the walled gardens lock things down, as cookies go away, TikTok is a phenomenal asset on the basis of the number of users that it has and how engaged those users are, and that they are a first-party, identity-strong data asset, basically.
So if we, think about that, so you've got big moves, people like Oracle jettisoning their third-party data assets, trying to acquire, their own first-party data reservoirs. Switching back to the marketer, in your B2C brands right now, why do you think they should own their own consumer data?
Well, you've got a huge opportunity to actually build relationships. For better or for worse, a lot of brands and businesses decided to kind of give up control, and control's the wrong word, but give up on the idea of first-party data because we were so third-party data rich for so long. PII-based data, device-based data, people-based data, it was so ubiquitously available in the platforms that you wanted to use to reach consumers on. So a lot of people just said, okay, well, I don't really need to invest or spend money on building my own data asset. We're starting to see that change now. And whether you are a DTC challenger or a CPG that is just trying to stay ahead of the pack in a marketplace-driven world, you are beginning to think about creating a data asset of your own. And, you alluded to the term zero-party data, and that's a lot of what we're seeing. First-party data, just to sort of give a quick context, is the data that a brand or a business collects about a consumer in the course of a transaction, right? I buy something from you. You need my address. You need my email address to send the confirmation. You need my credit card information, all that kind of stuff, right? And even, if it's a piece of apparel, you now know the size that I wear because I've ordered it in the size that I wear. You think. But under zero-party data, this is the data that a consumer explicitly, proactively, intentionally shares that's not part of a transaction. So I might share my size and, where I wear on top and bottom and shoes and all this kind of stuff if your service or your product can make recommendations to me about what other people who, wear my same clothing sizes have liked. I might share information so that you can tailor a landing page or a content page or my mobile app to me. That's zero party because it's not information that I'm required to give you in the course of a transaction, right? The focus on zero-party data and the interest in creating zero-party data experiences has skyrocketed. I would say we are seeing 200 to 300% increases over the last couple of years in the inquiries we get from marketers, that we get from experience teams, user experience, customer experience teams, and even customer intelligence and analytics and insights teams. So there's a very real understanding that you can't be data poor anymore. You have to start building a data asset. And unless you're a commerce brand, unless you have real reasons for people to transact with you, you've got to deliver the value some other way. And zero-party data and those experiences are becoming that mechanism. It turns out that zero-party data is also a phenomenal tool for beginning to build your own first-party identity graph.
So fascinating insights. Completely agree with you around the huge uplift in marketers moving to collect zero-party data, to build out their own databases around consumers, to pull their own first-party data from all their interactions across different channels. And we can sort of clearly see people that are falling into the winners and the losers camp in terms of this new age of privacy and the impact on marketers' use of data, because some brands are so far ahead of others,
yes.
and others need to play catch up. But you've talked before about the fact that you need to have trust in a brand to get consumers to offer up their data. A value exchange is obviously an important part of that transaction. What do I get in return for my data when I'm connecting to a brand? But how important do you think is this concept of brand trust moving forward as we enter into this world where things like zero-party data become much, much more important to drive personalization than they were a few years ago?
Look, I think ultimately, I hate to hedge here, but I think it does make a little bit of a difference what category you're in. And I think that is also shifting. So, 5 years ago, I might have said like, oh, it doesn't really matter. You're making paper towels. Like nobody cares whether you're trustworthy or not. We're seeing that change as more consumers become values driven. They want to buy the stuff that's recycled, or they're willing to have the paper towels that aren't so, thick and absorbent, if they feel better about the environmental consciousness or awareness and the sustainability of a brand. But there are some brands and some businesses and verticals where trust is paramount. So think about cars, automotive. Think about travel and hospitality. Think about any kind of product that has anything to do at all with your children, right? Any kind of children's product is critical to have trust. So I do think it depends to some extent on, your vertical and your category. That all said, I don't think that there are any brands and businesses that can afford to not be seen as trustworthy. And as you know, Richard, we've done a bunch of studies and analysis on what drives trust. And it's, competence, it's integrity, it's honesty, it's transparency. Nobody can afford to sort of drop the ball on any of these. But there are brands and verticals where if you drop that ball, if you're not transparent about your use of data, if you're not using data ethically or with integrity, or you're sort of like greenwashing or values washing, saying you're doing one thing and it turns out you're really not. Those things, I think we can't afford to do anymore. That ship has sailed.
Fatemeh, I know we've got one of your colleagues, Stephanie Liu, who is going to be doing a session in Signals all around how brands can actually collect zero-party data at scale. So for all of those that are watching this particular session, please go and see Stephanie's session to learn how you can actually go build those connections and collect that zero-party data. Fatemeh, I have to also say for everybody that's watching, if you are interested in anything around kind of privacy, some of these changes, the tech wars around privacy, please, please, please go and follow Fatemeh on Twitter. I can tell you that she is the best person for you to go and look at, in my opinion, on this subject. So make sure you add her to your kind of follower list. And Fatemeh, thank you very much. We've come up against time. It's been great to talk to you as usual. Personally, I would like to say keep driving the ethical use of data by marketers, that whole agenda. You've been a leading light in it. And I would say keep on trucking. We love seeing you do what you're doing.
Richard, thank you so much. Those are really kind words, and you should warn people though that if they come and look at my Twitter feed, there's a lot of like rage scrolling that happens there too. So just be forewarned.
I'm the
thank
same.
you so much.
Don't worry.
I love the way that you guys are doing this event. I think it's a really novel approach to doing a virtual event, and kudos to you guys for the format.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Fatemeh, thank you very much.
Signals 20, the content series for marketing rock stars.